Okay.
So welcome everyone. This is our business of coaching series, which is more like how to start a small business, how to run a small business / your own business. We've done a couple sessions that are focused on coaching more than anything else, but as we're going on and the kinds of questions and requests we're getting from you guys, I'm realizing this is really a small business type podcast, which is great, or podcast, videos, it's a webinar series. So I think, for today, obviously a lot of you, if not most of you, are coaches. Welcome. But if anyone here isn't a coach, that's perfectly fine, because I think you'll get a ton of value out of this session, as well as upcoming sessions in this series. So please join us every first Wednesday right here on the same link. And today's session is on virtual meetings, which this kind of is a virtual meeting. It's a webinar, so it's not, many to many. It's a couple of us to many. But ironically enough, I actually created a green screen for the purpose of these webinars, and I was going to use it today. And then, like an idiot, I put on green makeup and a green top, so my green screen got all confused. So clearly I have a lot to learn about virtual meetings. But that's what Meenakshi is here for. And she will introduce herself, because I'm probably going to do a terrible job of it. But she straddles 2 continents, many cultures and industries, and she wears many hats. But her expertise in teamwork, especially across different kinds of boundaries, is very much in her wheelhouse. So she actually came up with this topic, and I thought this is super relevant, since we're a virtual company. Technically, we don't have a central office. Coacharia is distributed all around the world, and all of us work remotely, and many of our coaches work remotely with their clients. So today we will learn about everything to make meetings, coaching, etc. better when you're doing it online. So Meenakshi, I will turn it over to you, and I'll be in the background, possibly interrupting with anecdotes of how badly I have done things in the past. So thanks, welcome.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Magda. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on wherever you are. I hope I'm audible all right, and everyone can see my screen. Okay, all right, thank you. So my name is Meenakshi Iyer, and I live in a suburb called Ashburn in the state of Virginia on the east coast of the United States. I moved here about more than 12 years ago, actually, and I'm originally from India. What I'm going to talk about today is something very close to my heart, primarily because of my own personal and professional experiences. I've lived in more than 10 different cities in India and then in the US. I've moved around. I think I've moved houses about more than 10 plus times. And I've always worked in multicultural groups, multicultural teams, and also virtual or global teams, distributed teams. By way of, okay. I'm going to minimize the chat. Sorry, Magda.
Yeah, I mean, actually, okay? Sorry, I should have said something. I will keep an eye on chat, so I'll interrupt you if there's anything in there, but feel free to ignore it.
Okay, all right, thanks. All right, okay. Very quick about in terms of my background. I've worked in different industries ranging from healthcare to IT services to English as a second language, English as a foreign language, ESL, EFL training. And that's by way of background. After about 20 years, more than 20 years of being at it, I took a sabbatical as of last year, and this is what I'm doing today is the kind of work that I would like to do as an independent business owner. So that's how I actually found Coacharia. I attended one of the first business of coaching webinars, and it was, I took away a lot from that. And this is sort of me trying to give back on the same forum. So without further ado, the topic that we're going to talk about today is how do we work in boundaryless teams and facilitate teams and boundaryless meetings. I actually wrote this down because this was something that I want to make sure I got across in this forum. What I'd like to focus on is the application of interdisciplinary concepts and practices in the workplace. How can we apply some of those concepts from other areas that we may not even have thought of? And how can we bring that to the workplace, particularly in the context of the modern day internet age where your physical location hardly matters. So we have teams that are distributed, that are global. Even if you are co-located, you may have, even if your office has only one location, you may still have people that are working from home and things like that. The second takeaway that I'd like to present or offer up are some practical tips and techniques, including some free online tools that are out there. So you may already be familiar with some of them, but these are some of the ones that I'm very familiar with or have become familiar in the past few weeks and months. Lastly, I'd like to challenge each and every one of you to think about how you can design for everyone. And in this context, regardless of their physical location. And what I mean by design for everyone, that's something that I'll get into in a minute. And very importantly, I want us all to remember that we tend to bring our whole selves to work, whether we care to admit it or realize it or not, but we do. So what does that mean in the context of working across physical boundaries? And please keep putting your questions in the chat window, and we'll take all the questions at the end of the session.
Yeah, so I'll be keeping track of chat, and everyone. This webinar is technically for 1 hour, but we might go over because there's a lot of stuff that Meenakshi has to share. So if you do have to go early, that's okay. We will have the entire video on YouTube later, so you can watch anything you have missed.
Thank you. All right. So just wanted to have the agenda out there. What I wanted to start with is our context, some of which we've already talked about just now. And then what are some of the challenges in the current context in working across physical boundaries? And then I'd like to present some concepts and associated practices. I'd like to share my personal ABC of productive boundaryless meetings. I'm going to talk about what I mean by that. What are my personal ABC of that? And some tips and techniques. And then we'll take a quick look at what is some of the technology that's available, and quite a bit of it is available for free as well. I've also put together a list of the resources, online resources and articles and such that I have referred to in preparation for this session. And then of course we'll wind up with questions and answers. So, if I may, and if you can please put your responses in the chat window, what are, how many of you, those of you that work in virtual environments, maybe you are coaches that where your clients are remote, or you work in a typical in a corporation, and you have team members that are remote or work from home and things like that. What are some of the differences that you've noticed in the context of working with folks that are located with you, that are co-located with you, vis-a-vis people that are, let's say, in different time zones or remote? So if you can just take a minute and put down your responses in the chat window, that'd be great.
As everyone's doing that, maybe I'll share some things I've noticed. For any of you who attended the webinars before with us, with Ram especially, the first time, for me it was challenging because he's like this. And he's listening really intently, but it's really hard to read body language and interpret what's happening in a virtual meeting. It's much harder, I think, and different than face-to-face. So for me personally, it took a while to realize that no, this is how Ram functions, and he just, it's amazing how well he listens, especially when he puts, closes his eyes. But it's not something I would have immediately gotten.
Yeah.
But anyway, I will take a look at what's in the chat.
Yeah.
So
by the way,
communication is not easy. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I just noticed that there is another Meenakshi Iyer on the call.
Another one? No.
Yes, that's cool.
Hello. Any Magda Walczak Wozak up there? Raise your hand. All right, so in chat. Are you looking at them or should I read them out?
No, I'm looking at them. And a quick reminder to everyone, if you wouldn't mind selecting all panelists and attendees in the dropdown, that'd be great. So everyone can see everything. Thank you. So there's quite a bit. There's communications are not so easy. You can't just walk over and ask a question. Cultural influences affecting interpretation, hard to understand what lies beneath the surface. People who work virtually are more disciplined and rigorous about time management and respecting meetings. Need to keep communication correct. Things can be lost across time zones. I like this comment about a cubicle nation at work, and we do not meet very often anyway. Working remotely is getting everyone into a meeting because of time zones. Yeah, so I see a lot of references to time zones, culture, context, someone talking about jargon. Yes, listening attentively. Fantastic. So these are exactly some of the things I had in mind. So we are kind of all on the same page. So now you can keep the responses coming in. I'm just going to switch back to the presentation. So yeah, I just thought I'd start with some humor. I'm sure especially based on the responses, most of us seem to have had some of these situations, either happen to us where we struggle with the technology, making it work, or, we try to multitask because we are remote. So just a Dilbert's view of the world over there. So face-to-face meetings, what are some of the key characteristics? There's small talk, and then there's the rest of this. Because you are in person, there's eye contact, there's nonverbal cues. So, someone that made a reference to not being able to figure out what's under the surface. In-person meetings, it's much easier to do that. And then, of course, there's water cooler chats. You have the opportunity to sort of debrief after the meeting, and typically there's this meeting after the meeting, right? And so you have all these different opportunities in face-to-face meetings. And yes, I do agree and understand that even if you're co-located, a lot of us tend to take those calls from our desks because there's always a conference bridge available more often than not. But then in those situations, I really think that we are losing the advantage that we typically have in having a face-to-face meeting, but that's based on that individual workplace culture. Now, if we compare this with what happens in virtual meetings, we talked about that as well, right? There were several references made to technology, like what we're doing right now. And what does that sort of give us? It leads to a little bit of multitasking sometimes, depending on whether you have your video on or not. People are in different time zones. There's very little context because you're away from where all the action is happening, or you are in a different. You come from a different culture, so you have a little bit of less context in terms of what's happening wherever the head office is, for instance. And then typically, like after this webinar, for instance, if it were a live conference, there'd be opportunity for the attendees to talk amongst one another, and then for me as the presenter to also mingle with the attendees. So there's going to be opportunity for feedback, opportunity for further conversation. So that's what I mean by debrief. whereas after this webinar, everyone's going to log off and then go do their own thing. So these are some major differences in terms of how our face-to-face meetings work and how typically our virtual meetings work. So when I thought about this, and I spent a lot of time not only facilitating such meetings, and also, I used to lead internal communications at a large IT services company that was a multinational, and so I've dealt with this for many years now. Lately, I've been thinking about how can I bring in the concepts of design thinking into doing better meetings. And so when I started thinking about that, what I realized was that by differentiating between face-to-face meetings and virtual meetings, I'm starting with a distinction in my mind. So I took a step back and then I said, you know what? A meeting is a meeting, a team is a team, regardless of physical location. So it's boundaryless. And using the concept of what are known as how might we questions, HMW questions in the design thinking world, this is what I'd like to work through with all of you in today's session. How might we make meetings boundaryless, effective, and engaging for everyone? And then, I've provided the relevant URL for you to go back and look at additional information on this. But this is what I'd like to explore a little further. So as I said at the beginning, I'd like to offer some concepts and practices and then move on to some practical tips and techniques and then use of technology. So I'd like to present my first concept, which is the concept of inclusive design. Now, what it is, we'll get into it in a minute. And the associated practice is to be anticipatory. Someone from a veteran of the hospitality industry once said to me, service, and he was talking about it in the context of customer service at a hotel, it's always anticipatory. So people providing the service are always one step ahead of their customers because they're thinking ahead in terms of what will the customer the guest may ask for next or will need next. And so if as meeting facilitators and as team leaders and as leaders in general, and you don't have to have a title in order to be a leader, every individual, when in the workplace, each of us, whether we believe it or not, whether we realize it or not, we are one another's customers. So it's almost like an assembly line. So your tasks and your work originate from somewhere else. You do something to it and then you pass it on. So in that context, being anticipatory really, really takes our individual productivity and our individual response at the workplace to a very, very much higher level. So in exploring the concept a little bit further, according to the British Standards Institute, this is what inclusive design is. It's and this is from a touch and feel tangible product perspective or services. The key words, those I've highlighted them in blue text here. So the design of mainstream products and or services that are accessible to and usable by as many people as reasonably possible. And the third thing in my mind that's very important in this is without the need for special adaptation or specialized design. And this is what struck me when I was thinking about meetings. And I said, you know what, just by thinking about virtual meetings in a separate bucket, I am expecting, and I'm setting it up in a way that I'm expecting myself as a facilitator and my attendees, I'm as if I am making some allowances for them, which actually, if you look at it, is not the case. So where anybody is, their physical location shouldn't really matter. So how can we take that concept and apply it? Excuse me. There's some additional literature. So the This graph really spoke to me. So if you look at this, this is again, this was a survey that was done by Microsoft many years ago in looking at how they could make their products more accessible. And when they looked at it, they found that less than a quarter of the population had no difficulties, and the rest of it had some level of difficulties. And this is, again, this was taken in the context of physical limitations. However, you can actually, if you look at this, you can actually apply it to whatever area that you can think of. The concept here is that we tend to design anything for the mainstream. Most doors are designed for right-handed people. Pairs of scissors, it's very hard to find one for left-handed people. So and there's this fantastic TED talk by this woman called Sinead Burke. You have to listen to that. I've included the link to this. You know, she has a medical condition due to which she's just, I think, about 3 feet tall. And so she absolutely cannot use any of the public bathrooms, particularly those ones in airports. And so, you know, she talks about it, she talks about her experience. So these are some of the things that I took as inspiration in the context of working with boundaryless teams. So what does it look like in action? So when you talk about accessibility, so teams collaborate regardless of their physical location. There are many different ways to do that. You can have chat, your instant messenger, your office email. You can build your team camaraderie. I've worked with teams where we had a WhatsApp group, and we knew that it was like our water cooler chat. We had a team of 10 distributed across 3 different time zones, 2 different countries. And we used WhatsApp to build our team camaraderie. So we even had virtual happy hours, you know. So your location cannot be it cannot be an excuse. Usability. How do we put that in action? Let's, as a team, agree on a core rules of engagement that work for everyone. So you're not making exceptions and allowances for anyone. For example, we say that, okay, if this is our time zones that we're working with, let's identify 2 or 3 hours that sort of overlap for everyone, call them core hours, and let's agree that all our very important meetings will only happen during those core hours, or meetings that require at least 90% of your attendance happens only in those core hours. Without the need for special adaptation, how does that look? Everybody feels included. So for example, your meeting invites automatically include a video link. So it's not that, you know, some people assume it's happening in conference room A in the office, and then you suddenly realize that 1 or 2 people are actually in another location. So you do some things by default. So again, you know, from a design perspective, if you focus more on designing for those on the sidelines, then you end up designing for everyone. What tends to happen is when you tend to design something just for the mainstream, those on the sidelines get left out. Moving on. So the next concept I want to present is dealing with dysfunction. There is this fantastic book by Patrick Lencioni called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Again, another must read. It's very easy to read. It's written like a modern day fable for those of you who are not familiar with the book. And there's also this fantastic 40-minute YouTube video by the author. So that's like your Cliff Notes version of the book. And the reason I bring this up is that any team, regardless of where they are, there's bound to be certain dysfunction. And then the key is to understand them, to recognize them, acknowledge them, and then work through that. What does that mean? What's the associated practice? I recommend that by being authentic, consistent, disciplined, and very importantly, intentional about how you want to function as a team and how you want to conduct your meetings, that goes a long way in doing that. Now, what do I mean by that? There's 2 aspects that I want to present to you. This is just a summary, and I've listed the source here. So Lencioni talks about 5 layers, if you will, of the pyramid, 5 levels of the pyramid. And he starts, the foundational level is trust. And then he talks about absence of trust. What does that look like? How is it caused? How can you counter it? Fear of conflict. How many times have we been in meetings where there's a question or there's a yes/no question, or there's an opinion question, and people just tend to sort of agree, right? And we think, wow, great, moving on. Is that really agreement, or is it a manifestation of a fear of conflict? And this tends to happen a lot in meetings, and it's much harder in meetings where if it's virtual, if some of the attendees are not co-located, and much worse if the video is not on. So you miss out on all the nonverbal cues, you miss out on body language, you miss out on the eye rolls, So fear of conflicts, is it real consensus, or is it just artificial harmony? The next thing he talks about is lack of commitment and avoidance of accountability and attention to results. So my intent was not to get into this in detail, but then to bring this up as a concept, something for you to think about when you're dealing with your teams or your clients, to think about this. And these are a couple of quotes, something that really sort of stayed with me. One is about how do you ensure that people are heard, and what happens if they don't. And this next one is about, Lencioni's definition of politics. And this again goes back to my point about about the importance of being authentic. The second aspect in this, I wanted to bring up another concept of radical candor. There's a book by Kim Scott, Radical Candor. It's actually, this is it. This is a summary. So it's at the intersection. Radical candor is found at the intersection of care and challenge, which means you will challenge someone when you really, really care about them. You care about the outcome. You care about what happens to them. And that's radical candor. And that's the opportunity, the space for growth. And she, this is a fact. Again, there's a talk, if you don't have the time or the resources to read the whole book, but you can definitely listen to the talk. So in the context of, so we looked at a couple of concepts here. I want to move on to the third one, which is understanding flow. What do I mean by that? We tend to, and this I want to talk about specifically in the context of meetings. I read this somewhere, and I actually tried it once or twice with my teams. So there's this exercise that you can do if it's a smaller group. Just talk about, actually, let me step back. How many times have we been in meetings where you had a reaction from someone that was very sort of unlike them? It could be a negative reaction. More often when there are negative reactions in terms of, this person would probably always be very even-keeled and suddenly had a blowout, or was very quick to disagree to something, wasn't willing to give explanations, or not explanations, but their rationalization of it. We tend to, most of us, it's said that we judge others based on their actions, but we want to be judged based on our intention, right? So I found that understanding, and this is where flow comes in. So if we had stopped to find out what had happened before that person came to the meeting, what were they dealing with? Maybe they got some bad health scare, bad news, something happened. And it could be the other way around as well. Somebody could be in a great mood, and they might just approve everything that you asked for during the meeting, and maybe that's unlike them. So understanding where each one is coming from in that moment. I know it's very hard for us to do this in our constant go kind of world that we live in, but it really plays a role. So the practice that I recommend is thinking in terms of before, during, and after. And this comes in the context of the entire meeting management process as well. So if you are the facilitator and you are setting up this meeting, what have you got to do before the meeting? Set up the agenda, make sure you have the right people, make sure it's during core working hours, make sure you have all the right people. And even before that, what's the purpose for this meeting? Do you even need this meeting? Maybe if you think through this, you might realize you don't need this meeting. And that's a good answer as well. So preparation, what do you do during the meeting and what do you do after the meeting? They say 90% of the work is done before and after the meeting. If you think about it, there's a lot of truth to it. And for a minute, I want to take us to the healthcare space. What you're looking at is the World Health Organization's surgical safety checklist. This was something that those of you that have heard of Dr. Atul Gawande, he's based in the US. He wears many hats. He's a oncology surgeon. He's a professor, an author, staff writer for the New Yorker, many different things. He also is an entrepreneur. This was something he was involved with, and there's a book that he's written. It's called The Checklist Manifesto. He actually took inspiration from the world of aviation. Those of us in the US and even other places, you may be familiar with this movie called Sully, which was a real life account of what happened to a United Airways plane that landed in the Hudson on a cold January morning. But everybody on the plane was safe. So the story around that, and if you recall, the pilot and the co-pilot, they follow the checklist, and it's actually a paper checklist. And if you think about checklists a little bit more, there's the basic human values that need to be in place. In my experience, the number one value that needs to be in place is humility. Because a lot of us tend to think that I don't need a checklist. I remember this. A checklist is not about, it's not a test of your abilities, but it's simply there to ensure that the flow is maintained, right? So anyway, so coming back to this checklist, if you look at it, there are, 3 sections. So it's very simple. It's easy to read, just under 10 items under each list. So what happens before anesthesia is given to the patient? What happens before the surgeon makes the first cut? And what happens before the patient leaves the room? So it's broken down. When I was looking further online, I found this resource. This is very similar to that. So before the meeting, what do? You plan, and these are the 5 things that you do. At the start of your meeting, what do you do? During the meeting, what do you do? So this is again available online, and will be you'll have it as part of the deck. So as a quick recap of concepts and the associated practices, inclusive design and the practice is being anticipatory and thinking about those on the sidelines instead of just focusing on the ones in the mainstream. Dealing with dysfunction, and by being authentic, consistent, disciplined, and being intentional about it. And the third concept is that of understanding flow. So thinking in terms of before, during, and after. So these are this is sort of the theory part of the presentation, if you will. I'm just going to pause and check in with Magda. Magda, anything on the chat that I should look at?
Nothing specific. You're just, people are loving what you are doing. So continue
okay.
Doing you.
Okay, thank you. All right. So remember I said I have my special ABC. Well, it's not really special. There's no rocket science. One thing, sort of a sidebar. Again, I heard this somewhere and I don't remember exactly where, probably on a TED Talk, where they said, you know what, especially as adults, we really don't need to be taught as much as we need to be reminded. So this is my way of remembering it. And what is ABC? It's a little acronym I came up with. So this is my actions and behaviors checklist for having productive meetings. And let's see what's in the checklist. Leading with purpose. I alluded to this a little bit earlier, saying, you know what, when you think about a meeting or think about how you operate with your team, always having the why. Simon Sinek says, right? He has this tagline in a book and a talk, start with why. Always thinking about the why, leading with purpose, gives you that space to pause and say, why are we doing this? And you know what? You ask why enough number of times, and if your response is, well, we don't need to do this, like I said, you might find out you don't need this meeting, then that's great. But then just allowing yourself to have that space. What's the outcome you want out of the meeting? So we often tend to confuse output with outcome. All outcomes are outputs, but not all outputs are outcomes, right? There's this whole concept in the agile world, for instance, with OKR, objectives and key results. It's probably a rehashed version of management by objectives. So what is the outcome that you want from this meeting? Is it a decision? Is it information sharing? Is it reviewing something? Is it planning for something? That will help you. So purpose and your outcome, that will help you figure out who your attendees need to be. And I do want to make a point here is that a lot of us, when we receive meeting invites, I've seen this happen over and over again in workplaces that I've been a part of, people sort of tend to think that if they have no conflict, that is, if they are available during that time, that they just have to say yes and they'll take the meeting. No is an equally good answer. Or asking some questions around why your attendance is required for that meeting. There's another wonderful TED Talk by this woman called Lisa Bodell. She's the CEO of a future of work consultancy called Future Think, based in New York. And in her talk, she says, people get mad when someone wastes their money. How come we don't get mad when somebody wastes our time? Time is an irreplaceable resource. Money, if you lose it, you can earn it back. Time, you cannot. And this is something that we, as meeting attendees, it's our right and a responsibility to ensure that we are adding value to that meeting by being there. And if not, no is the right answer. And this goes back to the third item on my checklist: respect everyone and their time. So once you've figured out your purpose, once you've figured out your outcome, you know who are the people that you need on your meeting, then figure out where they are located. And if they're in different time zones, then make sure that so for example, if let's say it's a leaders meeting and you have to plan next steps on performance review cycle of for that quarter, do you want to hold that meeting on a Friday afternoon? Do you want to do it on a Monday morning? Maybe it's the middle of the day for you, but folks attending from other time zones, maybe it's the start of their day, end of their day. Think about it. So make sure that you respect, and that's how you show respect. By also the other thing, your tools, meeting, setting up your meeting, those tools actually allow you to see, especially if you're within the same organization, it allows you to see whether the person is available during that time or not. Take the time to do that. That's how you show respect. During the meeting, let's all ensure that, how many times have we caught ourselves already formulating a response, already formulating what we want to say, even when the other person is still talking? I'm guilty of that, especially when it's something I know I have a very clear opinion about. I know what you're going to say, and I don't want you to say it because what I'm going to say is the right thing. So let's step back and let's always remind ourselves, listen to understand, not to reply. And I think that this, particularly in our age of tweets and posts and retweets, this is extremely important. It's so easy for us to just sit there and comment or respond or retweet or basically relay the message along without looking to pause to understand what it is, right? The next item on my checklist, create and maintain psychological safety. This is a big one. I know that we can do a whole session on psychological safety. In brief, in my experience and in my opinion, psychological safety, my personal definition is where you can speak your mind openly without fear of retribution. And it's easier said than done, because there's a big role that our national cultures, our identities, things such as power distance, these all play a big role in how psychological safety is established and maintained in organizations. But within our context of each of us leading meetings and or facilitating teams, so my context is rather narrow in this case. What can we do to create and maintain psychological safety? And I believe that a lot of it is in how you prepare for the meeting. So once you have decided that this meeting is necessary, once you have identified your outcome, it is important that you help the attendees prepare for the meeting by providing any information that's relevant to the meeting ahead of the meeting, with clear expectations on what you want them to do once they receive that. And then ensuring that anything that's shared in that meeting, it remains within that context. If you're going to record the meeting, letting attendees know in advance that the meeting is going to be recorded. If the meeting minutes are expected to be shared with others, or particularly executive leadership and such, that be made known in advance, and things like that. During the meeting, as you're coming to the end of the meeting, making sure that there's a clear call to action. How many meetings have you attended where we finish the meeting and we go get a coffee and we wonder why we had the meeting or what we really achieved from that? There's a lot of literature and a lot of real practical literature around meetings. Number of attendees, for instance, you have this pizza rule. So if you have like 2 pizzas, more than if your attendees need more than 2 pizzas, then probably you have way too many people. And there's this mathematical formula that you can use to figure out the number of connection points that you need to actually talk to in order to maintain the consistency of what you're saying, and keeping everyone on the same page. So by adding every person that you add like up to 5 or 6 connection points per person by including them in the meeting. So that's something I can share at the end of the session. So clear call to action. The last item, the most important one, in my opinion, following up promptly on all the action items. Again, we've all been in one too many meetings where you then again meet to figure out what we talked about in the previous meeting, or you meet to figure out the agenda for the next meeting, right? So by following up promptly on all the action items that came out of that meeting, you really ensure that your meeting is not only productive, but you also perhaps make sure that you don't need another meeting, right? I was suddenly reminded of this poster that I've seen. I survived another meeting that should have been an email. So you can do that by doing your prompt follow-up. So that's my actions and behaviors checklist. So if you look at it, there's less than 10 items. They all start with an action word, and they don't have too many words in each statement. So it's easy for me to remember why I have them on my checklist, and it has a purpose for me. Yeah. Moving on to some practical tips and techniques. This is something, the first one, SBAR, again, comes from the healthcare space. There are variations of it in the non-healthcare space: situation, background, assessment, recommendation. So by the way, these tips and techniques can be used in different types of meetings. They can also be used when you're just in your everyday working with your meeting, with your team. So SBAR is I've used SBAR in, let's say, you have to make a decision between which tool to pick, which tool as in a software to pick to solve a particular problem. And let's say you have 2 or 3 different tools in front of you, you could write an S-bar for each of them. And then it's easier to make decisions. So decision making is where I personally use S-bar. Radar charts, I'll show you, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, I'll show you a visual at the end of this session. So essentially, it's like it looks like a spider web. You have many different parameters, and they're all like a star. And then you rate it, and you get a little web-looking output. That helps you understand what your current footprint is of whatever. So for example, if you're looking at team attributes, so do team members feel trusted, feel that they can trust one another? Do they feel like they collaborate well enough? Do they feel like how do they rate communication? So you can have trust, collaboration, communication, team spirit, and let's say 4 or 5 things like that, and then have each one rated. And then when you plot it on, it's like a graph. You already know that in order to be a successful team, your graph should look like that. And maybe when you plot it, it looks like this. So you know how much you have to improve. 6 thinking hats. This is something I personally haven't used, but I have read about this. This is again, and there's literature around this. I've included it. It's basically making decisions in a very dispassionate way. So if you have to make choices. So there are different colored hats, one for each purpose. One is you are thinking only about the positives. Next, another hat could be when you wear that hat, you're only being devil's advocate, and so on and so forth. So that's 6 thinking hats. Retrospectives, most of us do it in one way or another. And we typically tend to do it in terms of what went well, what didn't go well, what can be improved. There's another one, another variation to that, which is start, stop, continue. What should we start doing? What should we stop doing? What should we continue doing? And there is a variation on that, which is called a star retrospective, where you add a few more things to it. You add what should we do less of, what should we do more of, and what did we learn? So that's your star retrospective. So these are all different techniques that you can use to improve the quality of your meetings and also in your everyday working. Technology. This I'm just going to run through really quick because I think we are 12 minutes out. So these are some online tools. I've used several of these for meeting management. So let's say you want to pick a topic you want to vote on what's the most critical topic for your next meeting, depending on your type of meeting. So idea boards is typically used by Scrum teams to run their retrospectives. You can use a simple Google Doc. It's shared. You can use you can just create an Excel using Google Sheets, or just have a doc, share it, and have people vote on topics. Meeting space. So Zoom, like we are on. Then there is Meet through Google. There's Google Hangouts. Meet is a paid service. Google Hangouts is a free service. Anyone with a Google Gmail account has access to Hangouts, which is both audio and video. Skype, of course, same deal. And other collaborative tools, there's several. So if you want to run polls, ask questions, again, meeting prep, you can use Slido. They have a free version. Miro, it's like a remote, a virtual whiteboard. That's up to a certain point, it's free. Strategizer, these are more like, that's those of you that are familiar with the whole business model canvas. There are several canvases like that. Customer journey canvas, then there's a culture canvas. The culture canvas particularly is something that you can use in this context. And some of them are freely downloadable, some of them it's a paid account. The Atlassian blog, that's one of my favorite resources. Atlassian is a product company it's an Australian company. Their products are all about helping teams collaborate. They are pioneers in breaking physical boundaries. And they, in true spirit of their so they practice what's called as open work. In true spirit of that, they actually have all of this work-life stuff available on their blog for free for anyone. So that's an active link. You can take a look. They have playbooks, that's what they call them, for teams. They have things like Health Monitor and stuff like that that you can actually print off, and they also give you instructions on how to run that for your teams. So that's so these are some technology-based tools that I wanted to talk about, and these are all the references that I've listed here. They're all live links. And I wanted to close by showing you this visual. I saw this on Twitter last week, and I was like, wow. It took me a while to figure out what this is. So those of you that struggle like me, so this is basically the world map, just the sea, right? And so that's your Arctic Circle, and this is Antarctica. I was like, wow. So to me, working across boundaries, it's all about perspective and being aware of the other perspectives that are out there. So I just wanted to close with that. That's all I had. Magda, back to you.
Thank you, Meenakshi. To say this session was awesome is an understatement. So
I appreciate that.
Everyone, if you want to ask any questions, this is your time. There were a couple questions earlier, but people were attentively listening. So someone asked, how does radical candor intersect with emotional intelligence?
So my response to that, based on, so I have practiced radical candor to some extent because I consider myself a what you see is what you get kind of person. So take it or leave it, which is, so I have zero tact is what I think. Like
Me too, that's why I like you so much.
I could never be a diplomat.
Me neither.
So I think that the concept of radical candor and how it intersects with emotional intelligence is knowing when to practice being candid or when to give that feedback. So it's not about sugarcoating the feedback, but about knowing, sensing, not more than knowing, it's about sensing, sense and respond. So you go by a lot of things. It could be facial expressions, it could be eye contact, it could be tone of voice, a lot of things that you are constantly receiving from the other person, and you can do that only if you're paying attention. That's the other thing, and I forgot to mention that we all focus a lot on time management but very little on attention management. So you can have 10 different things, your time slots blocked off on your calendar, but if you're still looking at email, looking at your phone, and then you're managing your time but not your attention. So in order to practice radical candor, being present in the moment with the other person without any distractions, I think that's the starting point. It's not about giving feedback as much as it's not about you who's giving the feedback about the other person. So unless and until you're invested in an overall positive outcome for the other individual, I would refrain from giving any feedback, because then you're making the feedback about you and not about the other individual. I don't know if that helped answer the question.
I mean, it did to me. If the person who asked wants to jump in with any clarifications, please go ahead. But I think what kind of came up for me as you were talking just now is we have this preconception about how long meetings should be, and we schedule them in half an hours or 1 hours. Some people do the express meeting where they do it at 25 minutes so that they try to cut down. But even like all of these approaches, like none of them are actually right or wrong. It's like we shouldn't be filling the meeting. We should be focusing on what do we need, like the principles you communicated, and making sure everyone's paying attention. If they aren't, like, what's the point of sitting there for the next 10 minutes because we scheduled it? And I feel that happens a lot.
Yes,
anyway.
Yes. And so to that point, actually, I was reminded of something my mentor, I learned this from my mentor. He would always schedule meetings 5 minutes after the hour and end at 10 minutes before the hour. So especially in our workplaces where we are running from meeting to meeting, that gave some breathing time if you are stuck in back-to-back meetings. And that's something that I've practiced. The key is to start and stop on time. And these are some things we can learn from Scrum, one of the agile frameworks. You time box everything. So your work is done in a sprint. And so if let's say it's a 2-week sprint, you have 10 business days to do that work. You don't just add another day to the sprint just because you have extra work. No, you close it out and you're done with that sprint. If something is left over, then you do it in the next sprint, but because the plan for the next sprint is already done. So you got to figure out when you will finish it. So we can take some of those principles in how we manage our time. The one other thing about time is if we ourselves don't respect our time, others will not. So if I think that every single meeting request I get, I have to accept it because that's the nice thing to do, then you are sending the message that you don't value your time. And that I'm sending the message that I don't value my time. And we may not think about it that way, but that's how it works. Something else that what you just said triggered in my mind. There's this sort of a, what do you call it? Like a blog, Thrive Global by Ariana Huffington. I remember reading in that there was an interview with the Hollywood actor Ashton Kutcher, and he talks about, and he says, emails that you receive are other people's demands of you. They are other people's asks of you. And it's your responsibility to, because that's how you respect yourself, by prioritizing it based on what you need to get done. So it's a very fine balance. And the same goes for time as well. Any other
I think
questions?
I need to make some changes in my day based on the things you're saying, which is great. Great or not great means I'm doing many things wrong, but we're here to live and learn.
Absolutely. I see a question here. Anuradha Sant says, many a times, even though one sends info before the meeting, most times people don't read it and come unprepared. How do you manage that? Oh my God, I wish I had a silver bullet for that. It's happened. It happens way more than we care to admit. I think because the one reason why it keeps happening is because there's no consequence. It's very hard if the person who's not read it is your boss or is the CEO of the company. Then how do you change that? Well, therein lies your problem, right? So it starts on the top for some things. People are watching what the leadership is doing in terms of behavior. But in scenarios that you can control, I would send a reminder. Find other ways. So if you are co-located, hallway chats. If you're not, ping the person before the meeting, because it's also as much as the person who's called the meeting is their responsibility as well, because you are leading with purpose and you have an outcome that you're looking for. And you have to do everything in your power to ensure that you're corralling everyone towards that outcome. So if it takes pinging people on Skype to say, hey, by the way, the meeting is in 2 days. Hope you have read that. Do you have any questions? The other thing is, how do you ask that, right? Yeah, I like Eileen's response, tied to the outcome and name the specifics. So naming it and making it transparent to everyone, roles and responsibilities in the meeting is great. That's one way to do it. When you publish the agenda, say these are the topics, these are the owners, and these are the people. In project management, it's called the RACI matrix, RACI. So that's responsibility, accountability. I forget what the C is. Yeah, RACI matrix, consult. C is for consult and I is for inform. So there's something called, so there's filling out that matrix for meetings, especially if your meetings are for, the purpose is really huge, if the impact is huge, then using that. So those are some techniques to use, Anuradha, and I think that ensuring that in scenarios where things are in your control, to account, one thing is to also plan. So make the assumption that people are not going to read it and buffer the first 10 minutes of the meeting to provide that time to people during the meeting to do that. Don't make a habit of it, because then there's no consequence for people not doing it, right? So I hope that helps.
Definitely. So we are at the hour. Are there any last questions from anyone? Because if not, then we'll wrap up. And like I mentioned in the chat, I will make sure that all the slides make it onto our blog, and it'll be linked also from the YouTube recording. So if you are watching this now or later, you will get the link to all the wonderful presentation, as well as all the links that Meenakshi mentioned. And for those of you who are asking for password, there is no password because these sessions do not count for CCEUs. They are here for you to learn. They do not, we do not necessarily focus on coaching competencies. They are supplementary to the work that we do as coaches. So we do not give certificates for these, but you can feel free to claim them as resource development hours when you go for your credential renewal. That said, I hope you do come back for other sessions because as you saw today, you learn so much. I mean, I've been working with virtual teams for most of my career, and the past 8 years, I've done consulting and worked in a couple different companies, and it's all been remote. I'm at home on my couch right now. So, you know, I thought, yes, I will learn something, but I learned a lot more than I expected, which is both good and bad. So thank you, Meenakshi, for being amazing.
Thank you. And
any closing? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. But I just realized, so Magda works for Atlassian as well, so she can vouch for the culture over there.
Yeah, I used to run marketing at Atlassian for a couple of years. The culture is amazing, and that the blog that Meenakshi mentioned, I mean, Atlassian is all about teamwork. There's on the stock exchange, their symbol is team. This is literally what they do. And if you are interested about anything about teamwork, virtual or otherwise, they will have some killer free resources on their website.
Absolutely.
But also I want to mention that Meenakshi has a consulting business, which she just started. So she'll be training with Coach Iyer to become a coach. But in the meantime, all the things she talked about today, as well as Agile and, you know, lots of other issues around teams, she does this already for companies. So if any of you need one-on-one consulting, of course, reach out to her coaching. But if you work for a company where Meenakshi's services could be useful, please reach out to her. We didn't do this webinar because it's a sales pitch. Please don't take it as that. But, you can see how valuable she can be to an organization. So please, I will put Meenakshi's details on the blog as well. But if you can't wait to get in touch with her, please just email me, magda@coachiyer.com, and I'll put you in touch right away. But other than that, I just want to say thank you. This was amazing.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity, Magda and Coach Iyer team. And yes, I'm looking forward to doing my training with Coach Iyer as well. And looking forward to I'm looking forward to my next
It's on record now.
Yes. This is really the next phase of my life and my career. And so my business, I've named it North Star Solutions and Services, northstar@work.com. And so, so I'm excited. It's 2020, so I can't wait to see what the future holds. So, and awesome. Best of luck, best wishes to everyone. And thank you for making the time to attend this. And thank you, Magda.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.